By the time Helena Müller reached the attic landing, she could no longer feel her fingers. Mrs. Müller had dragged her up 2 flights by the wrist, her rings biting into Helena's skin through a frayed glove, pausing only at each turn to spit one more polished cruelty over her shoulder. "Ungrateful!" The word had come at the first landing, unmarketable at the second, 22 and still a burden at the third. When the stepmother finally released her, Helena stumbled against the slanted wall of the top passage and stood there, breathless, listening to the rustle of expensive silk retreat downward. The house settled into its usual noises, a distant poker striking grate bars, crockery in the morning room, the muffled laugh of a caller who would never be invited to look above the first floor. She waited until she heard the drawing-room door close below. Only then did she open her own little room and step inside. The attic chamber had once been a nursery closet. A narrow bed under the eaves, a chipped washstand, and a walnut writing box her father had given her when she was 12 were all it held. In damp weather the wallpaper lifted from the plaster in weary curls. In winter, breath smoked in the air. In spring, draughts slid beneath the door and made the candle tremble while she worked. She set her candle on the crate she used for a table and looked down at her wrist. A bruise was already blooming, purple under her pale skin. Do not cry where anyone can hear. The rule had become as fixed as prayer. In the mirror, clouded with age and cheap silvering, her face looked as it always did after Mrs. Müller's tempers, colour-drained, mouth tight, dark hair loosened from its pins. She had been called plain so often she nearly repeated it to herself before strangers could. Yet candlelight betrayed the lie more faithfully than any compliment ever had. It found the clean line of her cheek, the grave width of her eyes, the fine-boned stillness of her face when she bent over a page. A few old family acquaintances had once called her striking. Mrs. Müller had laughed for 10 minutes and afterward made sure Helena heard plain from every tongue in the house. Below, the London residence still bore her father's crest over the front door, though the brass needed polishing and one laurel branch had cracked. Her father had built his reputation in shipping and insurance with relentless precision, rising from clerk to partner by knowing figures the way musicians knew scales. He had taught Helena ledger hands before she was 10, Latin headings before she was 14, and the practical anatomy of a crushed limb after an accident on the docks when no surgeon arrived in time. "Knowledge is not ornament," he used to say, guiding her pen along the clean vertical of a column. "It is ballast. It keeps you upright when the sea turns." Then fever took him in 11 days. After that came condolences, legal confusion, Mrs. Müller's economy that looked at first like prudence and then like appetite. Household silver disappeared piece by piece. Old clerks were dismissed and replaced with cheaper men loyal to no one but wages. Debts appeared where Helena had seen none in her father's books. Most of all, her own dowry, secured in trust in writing, witnessed by men now conveniently absent or dead, seemed to dissolve into accounts no one permitted her to inspect. She had asked questions once, early and openly. Mrs. Müller had smiled with maternal pity before company and told Helena she was grieving too violently to reason. After company left, she had locked the schoolroom for 3 days and sent the cook to leave meals on a tray like one fed to an inconvenient invalid. Questions thereafter became private. Tonight, beneath her mattress, wrapped in old muslin, were 10 copied sheets from her father's last quarter books, shipping contracts, insurance disbursements, transfer notices. Helena had made them by candle stubs, 1 letter at a time, whenever she could steal an hour at the abandoned escritoire in the back office. She no longer believed in coincidence, figures altered by a stroke, signatures inconsistent with known hands, payments routed through firms that had never before touched her father's trade. A knock cracked against her door so sharply she startled. "Miss Helena," called the maid from the stair, "Mrs. Muller says you are to come down at once. Mr. Baines is arrived." Mr. Baines, the widower creditor. Coarse laugh, damp hands, thick fingers heavy with mourning rings for a wife he had buried 6 months before and mentioned only when useful. 60 if he was a day. His breath smelled of claret and fennel. Mrs. Muller liked him because he held paper on some portion of their debts and had made no secret of accepting settlement in family terms. Helena closed her eyes once and saw, with piercing clarity, the rest of her life arranged like a prison ledger. Marriage to a man older than her grandfather had been. Children, if her body endured him. Social exile accomplished under the name of duty, and every trace of her father's truth burned as household refuse. She tucked the copied sheets deeper under the mattress and answered through the wood, "I am coming!" In the drawing-room, Mrs. Muller did not bother with delay. "You will marry Mr. Baines," she said between smiles, for their caller. "The announcement will be made within the month. You have had your sentimental period and will now act for your family." Helena stood very still. If she refused here, she would be dismissed upstairs, watched and eventually forced. If she agreed, she bought time. "As you wish," she said, and tasted iron where she had bitten her tongue. Mr. Baines beamed. Mrs. Muller's fan snapped open like a small white threat. The next afternoon, as if to celebrate the arrangement, Mrs. Muller handed Helena a stack of invitations to deliver and ordered her to go on foot to spare hiring another driver. The cards were for a musicale Mrs. Muller meant to stage in 2 weeks. All chandeliers and imported singers and debts pretending not to exist. Helena took the stack, tied on her bonnet, and stepped into rain. London in March had the colour of old pewter. Wheels hissed through mud. Shop awnings dripped steadily, and gentlemen who complained of the weather still expected women to thread traffic with grace. Helena moved quickly down Piccadilly and towards St. James's Street, skirts gathered in one hand, invitations sheltered in the other. Her mind ran columns while her feet counted paving stones, names, sums, dates, where she had hidden which copied page. At the corner near White's, shouting split the usual roar. A curricle horse reared, eyes rolling white. One wheel struck a rut and bounced sideways. A small body flew from the seat and struck the street with a sound Helena never forgot. For one suspended instant, nobody moved. Then everyone moved badly. "Don't touch him! Lift him! Lift him! Fetch water! Where is his man?" Helena dropped the invitations into the arms of a startled footman and knelt in mud beside the boy. He could not have been more than 9. Blood sheeted from a cut at his temple and ran under his ear. His limbs twitched. A gentleman reached for the child's shoulders to haul him upright. "Stop!" Helena snapped, sharper than she knew she could. "If his neck is hurt, you will kill him." The gentleman froze, offended and obedient at once. She slipped her hands steady as clamps at the boy's head, aligning it with his spine as her father had taught over dockside injuries and shipping accidents. "You," she said to a coachman hovering uselessly, "roll that coat and place it here, not under his neck, under his shoulders. Slowly. Good. You, sir, yes, you with the cane, tear linen. I need pressure for the temple wound, clean if you have it." "I am not your servant, madam." "Then be his." Her eyes cut to his face, and something in her tone made him comply. Someone shouted for a surgeon. Someone else declared one was already coming. The boy made a thin, raw sound and tried to turn. "No, sweetheart," Helena murmured, voice dropping instantly. Do not move. You are brave. Keep your eyes on me." Rain collected on her lashes. Blood warmed her gloves. She held pressure to the wound and counted breaths, each one a small treaty with panic. A carriage stopped hard at the curb. A tall man stepped down before the groom could lower the step, coat dark with rain, expression carved from restraint. Men around them shifted as if a ranking officer had entered a drill ground. "My lord," somebody said, "the child—" He saw the boy, then Helena's hands, then the improvised support, the torn linen, the crowd held at distance by her clipped instructions. His face did not alter, but the air seemed to. "Who is attending him?" he asked. "I am until someone more qualified arrives," Helena said without looking up. "If you are family, keep everyone back and get me a surgeon who can follow direction." A pause. "I am Lord Julian Ashford," he said, "Earl of Harrowden. He is my ward." "Then keep your people out of my way, Lord Harrowden." His mouth might have twitched, at surprise or anger she could not tell, but he turned and gave orders in a tone so controlled no one thought to disobey. Space opened around them. Within minutes a surgeon elbowed through, brisk and sceptical, until Helena delivered a precise account. Loss of consciousness for approximately half a minute, possible cervical injury, bleeding controlled, no forced repositioning. The surgeon knelt, examined, and glanced up at her with new respect. "Quite right," he muttered, "quite right indeed." Only then did Helena's hands begin to tremble. By dusk the boy was installed at Harrowden House, under close care, alive and expected to recover if fever did not set in. Helena, mud-splashed and exhausted, stood in the Ashfords' entrance hall, while rain drummed on the fanlight and liveried servants looked at her, as though uncertain whether she was heroine or hazard. Lord Harrowden came down the staircase with the surgeon's report in hand. "You acted decisively and with intelligence, Miss Muller," he said. His voice was low, even, perfectly formal. "My ward asks for the lady with the dark braid and the stern face. The surgeon believes familiar calm may assist him through the next week. If it is acceptable, I would engage you temporarily as governess companion until he is out of danger." Helena blinked. "My lord, I am not—" "Compensation will be proper. Your duties limited to his care and lessons. Once he can sit up, you would reside in the East schoolroom suite." It was absurdly generous. It was also an opening, a house with records, with men linked to shipping, with corridors her stepmother could not lock. Before Helena could answer, Mrs. Muller's voice floated from behind, bright as polished glass. She had arrived somehow, summoned by gossip faster than any messenger. "Lord Harrowden, what kindness!" she cried. "Miss Muller is honoured." "We accept, of course." Helena turned, stunned. Mrs. Muller's smile never moved from its place. At home that night, the true terms emerged. "You will go," Mrs. Muller said, unlacing her gloves with deliberate care. "You will be grateful, useful, and above reproach. And since Providence has placed you under that roof, you will not waste the advantage." "Advantage?" "Do not play innocent. Harrowden is said to keep extensive private ledgers. Estates, shipping interests, investments. Men in his position always know where money is hidden. You will observe. You will remember. If any mention is made of debts held against this house, you will report it to me." Helena stared. "You ask me to spy. Now I ask you to repay what you cost me by being born inconveniently female and unmarried." Mrs. Muller stepped closer, lowering her voice. "If you refuse, I announce your engagement to Mr. Baines tomorrow. If you obey, perhaps I postpone it." There it was. The noose and the ribbon offered as alternatives. Later, alone again in her attic, Helena packed 2 serviceable gowns, mending kit, grammar primer and the walnut writing box. Last, she took out the copied sheets from beneath the mattress and added them between blank foolscap pages. At dawn, she was driven to Harrowden House, where everything shone and nothing was warm. The butler received her with exact civility that contained no welcome. A dowager aunt in pearl grey assessed her over breakfast and asked 3 questions designed to expose vulgarity. 2 maids whispered when they thought Helena out of earshot. Rescue girls were either saints or schemers, and no one knew yet which category this one preferred. The boy, Thomas, gripped her fingers when pain woke him, and only settled when she read aloud from Plutarch in her careful, quiet voice. Lord Harrowden appeared at measured intervals, thanked her as he might thank a competent physician, and disappeared again into the machinery of his household. By the end of the week, Helena understood her stakes with painful clarity. If she failed here, Thomas suffered first. If she misstepped, the house would close against her and send her back to Mr. Baines. If she obeyed Mrs. Muller, she became complicit in whatever rot had consumed her father's name. If she defied her, the lies would begin: compromise, impropriety, ruin, and beneath all of it, like a current under black water, ran the numbers in her copied pages and the whispered possibility that Harrowden accounts might touch the same hands that had emptied her dowry. Helena stood that evening at the schoolroom window, watching rain silver the square, and pressed her father's signet, worn now on a ribbon beneath her bodice, flat against her palm until it hurt. Ballast, he had said. Very well, she thought, let the sea turn. Very well, she thought, let the sea turn. A soft rap came at the schoolroom door almost at once, as if the house itself had heard her and meant to test the declaration. "Miss Muller!" It was Thomas's nurse. "He is wakeful again." Helena let the signet fall back against her chest and turned from the window. "I'm coming." Thomas Ashford recovered by stubborn increments. In the first days he slept in jolts, waking disoriented and frightened by the bandage at his temple, his neck held stiff by the surgeon's cautions. Helena learned the pattern of his pain before anyone told her, the narrowing of his pupils before the headache, the tightness in his fingers before he fought tears, the way he asked pointless questions. What day? Which room? Is it still raining? When he was trying not to ask whether he might die. She answered each question as if it mattered as much as treaties. By the second week he could sit propped with pillows and endure 10 minutes of reading before his vision blurred. By the third he demanded Latin verbs and chess and stories about harbours he had never seen. "Did you truly shout at Lord Harrowden in the street?" he asked one morning, eyes bright with hero worship and mischief. "I did not shout," Helena said, adjusting his slate. Thomas grinned. "Cook says you ordered him like a footman." "Cook was not there." "No, but she says she can tell." Helena failed to suppress a smile. "Then Cook is a woman of uncommon perception." Across the room, the butler, Mr. Pritchard, made a disapproving sound that implied joking in school hours was a lower-class disease. He had never been openly rude, he was far too accomplished for that. But he had perfected the art of making obedience feel like trespass. Tea arrived exactly on time, and a degree too cool. Requests were fulfilled exactly as asked, and never as intended. Whenever Helena entered the main corridor, conversation among footmen flattened into silence smooth as lacquer. The Dowager Lady Ashford did not flatten anything. She sharpened it. "You have an efficient manner, Miss Muller," she observed at breakfast, spreading marmalade as though conducting surgery. "One sees it often in women who have had to make themselves useful." Helena buttered toast for Thomas without looking up. "Useful women keep houses from collapsing, my lady." A pause. Then the dowager's smile, small and glittering. How stoutly provincial! Lord Harrowden, seated at the head of the table, did not intervene. He passed Thomas the salt and asked after the boy's headache. His reserve was so complete it seemed less temperament than architecture, built to hold. If he had opinions about Helena, he kept them in locked rooms. That should have made her task simpler. It did not. Mrs. Muller's first letter arrived in a cream envelope sealed with violet wax, as if affection had penned it. Helena opened it in her chamber and found command beneath perfume. You will have observed by now where his lordship keeps papers. Do not pretend ignorance. Men like Harrowden keep duplicate ledgers apart from household books. If any note exists regarding Baines's instruments or my settlements, I require dates and sums at once. Helena folded the sheet and held it to the candle until wax spotted and curled, then stopped before flame touched ink. She could not destroy evidence yet. She might need every line later. She locked the letter in her writing box. The second letter came 4 days later, less perfumed and more explicit. Do not force me to remind you that a lady's reputation depends upon those willing to speak for her. I am willing. Be obedient, and I remain so. The third did not bother with pretence. If you continue obstinate, I shall be obliged to communicate to friends that your position in that house is not as innocent as claimed. I need only imply. You know how quickly gentlemen protect themselves by abandoning the woman. Helena read that line twice, then set the page flat and copied it word for word onto clean foolscap in her smallest legal hand. Ballast. She worked by fragments between Thomas's exercises, after the household settled, before dawn bells, building not one narrative but 3, her father's figures, Mrs. Muller's threats, and the map of who at Harrowden House touched outside trade. The household account books were closed to her, as they should have been. The schoolroom, however, received stacks of incoming correspondence for Thomas's lessons in handwriting and etiquette, invoices from estate agents, summaries from shipping brokers, letters from factor houses that expected eventual instruction from Lord Harrowden, and meanwhile required acknowledgement. Most were routine. Some were not. A notation from Climadoc Holdings referenced corrected disbursements per R.S. memorandum, as in the Muller matter. Helena's pulse kicked once, hard. A shipping abstract from Gravesend listed premium adjustments to a vessel her father had insured in his final quarter. Adjustments dated 2 weeks after his death, signed by a hand that mimicked but did not match his senior clerk's. She copied everything in cipher marks learned from old account drills with her father, harmless to any casual glance, meaningful to her. One wet afternoon, while Thomas napped and rain beat against the panes, Helena sat at the schoolroom table, translating a German mercantile letter the regular clerk had marked unclear. It was dense, legal, and badly phrased, but she teased sense from it, annotating margins in precise English. The door opened without announcement. Lord Harrowden entered carrying a portfolio, and halted when he saw her pages spread like a campaign plan. "I was told Thomas slept," he said. "He does. I am preparing his copywork." She half rose. His gaze dropped to the document in her hand. "That is from Bremer and Sohn, Mr. Keating said no one here could make headway with it." "I can make headway with most things if the verbs are left where they belong," she said, before caution caught up. One corner of his mouth moved barely. "Can you?" She handed him the translated sheet. He read in silence, eyes quick, then looked up with that same unreadable composure, but something behind it had shifted by a degree. You were taught languages?" "By my father, for shipping accounts. And legal notation?" "Yes, my lord." He set the paper down carefully. "You need not 'my lord' me in every sentence, Miss Muller. Not when we are discussing syntax. I did not know there were ranked forms of grammar. This time the faintest breath of laughter escaped him, so brief she might have imagined it. There are now. After that, correspondence began arriving to the schoolroom more often with discreet pencil marks. Translate, if possible. Summarize. Confirm figures. Always technically within Thomas's educational programme, always useful to the estate office. Mr. Pritchard noticed. So did the Dowager. I trust, Lady Ashford said one evening, that our guest remembers the distinction between helping a child with copybooks and insinuating herself into masculine business. Helena met her gaze. I remember every distinction I am shown, my lady. And still the net tightened. The harder thing was not the work, it was proximity. As Thomas regained strength, Lord Harrowden spent longer intervals in the schoolroom under the pretext of checking lessons. He stood at the mantel while Helena corrected sums. He asked Thomas to pass Caesar, and then listened not to the boy but to the cadence with which Helena guided him through difficulty. Firm, patient, exact. Sometimes Harrowden left a query on the table in his own hand. Please review attached freight assessment, discrepancy line 4. Sometimes he remained while she did, watching the path of her pen as if calculation itself were a language he had forgotten he spoke. The household read what it wished into each moment. A tray arrived late. A maid accidentally opened Helena's door without knocking. Whispers paused at her approach and resumed behind her. Mrs. Muller's fourth letter found her at supper and poisoned the meal before she broke the seal. I am informed your influence increases. Do not insult me with scruples now. You will obtain access to his private ledgers, particularly any chest in the West Library. I am told the key is kept near his watch at night. If you are too timid to use your face, use your pity. Helena's hand shook once, more in fury than fear. She folded the letter and tucked it into her sleeve before Thomas could see. That night she sat awake long after candles should have been extinguished, reading her father's copied sheets beside Mrs. Muller's demands. Names surfaced like wreckage in fog. R. S. repeated beside altered disbursements. Baines's firm on 2 transfer slips hidden behind routine debt instruments. Harrowden estate agents listed as intermediaries where none were usually needed. Not proof yet. Pattern. She needed one thing she did not have. Access to old comparative signatures from both houses, ideally formal contracts impossible to dispute. Harrowden's West Library almost certainly held some. She loathed the thought of going near it. She loathed more being blind. At dusk, 2 days later, under perfectly legitimate instruction to fetch Thomas's atlas from a side cabinet adjoining the library passage, Helena found the corridor empty. Firelight from the half-open library door striped the floor. Inside she could see the edge of a massive desk, shelves rising to plaster cornice, and on a side table a dark iron strongbox with brass corners. She did not enter. She stood at the threshold measuring distances, routes where records might be stored. A shadow moved at the far end of corridor, a housemaid carrying folded linen. The girl glanced up, saw Helena near the library, and looked away too quickly. Helena took the atlas and left. By breakfast the story had grown teeth. "Shocking what ambition drives a woman to!" murmured one footman loudly enough to be overheard as he placed kedgeree. "Near the strong box, they say," whispered a maid to another in the morning-room passage. "After dark," supplied the second. "Alone." Lady Ashford did not whisper at all. "My dear Julian," she said over coffee, "your charitable impulse has become a domestic scandal. The child is nearly recovered. Surely we may restore proper boundaries." Thomas set down his spoon with a clatter. "Miss Muller did nothing wrong." "Children are poor judges of adults," said the dowager. Helena kept her face still and her eyes on Thomas's plate while heat climbed her throat. Across the table, Lord Harrowden said nothing for 3 heartbeats, then, "Enough." Only that, but the word landed like a gavel. After breakfast, Mr. Pritchard informed Helena, with funeral solemnity, that she was not to enter the west corridor without written direction. 2 maids ceased bobbing curtsies entirely, and offered stiff nods instead, as if she had fallen in rank overnight. By noon, humiliation had curdled to alarm. Rumour this precise did not bloom from idle talk alone. Someone was cultivating it. If Mrs. Muller had reached anyone in this house... At 4 o'clock, a 5th letter arrived, this one without perfume, seal broken and resealed as though handled by more than one person. The servants are already speaking. You see how easy reputations bend. Retrieve what I asked for before you are sent home in disgrace. If needed, tell Harrowden you acted for love. Men forgive vanity sooner than intelligence. Helena crumpled the sheets so hard the paper cut her palm. A knock sounded at her chamber door just after dusk. She expected Mr. Pritchard with formal dismissal instructions. Instead, she heard unfamiliar silence. In the corridor, no footman, no rustle of skirts, no clink of coal scuttles. The house, usually full of managed motion, had gone strangely still. Then a man's voice, low through the wood. "Miss Muller, it is Harrowden. May I come in?" She stared at the door, certain she had misheard. When she opened it, Lord Harrowden stood alone. No butler behind him, no hovering maid. His coat was unbuttoned, as if he had come in haste from his study, dark hair slightly disordered for the first time since she'd known him. "I have sent the corridor staff downstairs for the evening," he said before she could speak. "No one will interrupt us." Helena's fingers tightened on the latch. "My lord, Julian," he said, then shook his head once. "No, keep the title if you prefer. Only do not lie to me to protect my comfort." The words were so unlike him, she forgot caution and stepped aside. Her chamber at Harrowden House was modest but warm. Narrow bed, writing stand, a coal fire low in the grate. He looked around once, taking in the orderly poverty of her possessions, then turned to face her with the same composure he wore everywhere, except his jaw was tight enough to show strain. "There is gossip," he said. "I should have checked it at once. Instead, I watched who fed it." A brief pause. "I have learned enough to know this did not begin in my kitchen." Helena said nothing. "I also know," he continued, "that you have been copying things, figures, names. You have asked Thomas idle questions about firms no child should care about. You stood at my library door and did not enter." His gaze held hers. "Tell me what game is being played in my house." She felt the old instinct rise, deflect, endure, protect herself through silence. It had kept her alive for years. It would ruin everything now. Slowly she crossed to the writing stand, opened the walnut box, and drew out the packet she had built. Mrs. Muller's letters tied with plain thread, her father's copied sheets, her own comparison pages marked in careful columns. "I am not playing a game," she said. "I am trying to survive one." He took the top letter, read a line, and his expression changed from restraint to something colder and far more dangerous. "She threatened to accuse you of compromising yourself," he said quietly. "Yes." "To force you to steal from me." "Yes." "And the man she means to marry you to, Baines, is named in these transfer slips." His eyes scanned the columns, quick and exact. "These are estate-linked intermediaries, some from my late steward's period." Helena swallowed. "Your late steward?" "Robert Selden, R.S." The initials dropped like iron between them. "He managed my brother's affairs before the accident. I trusted him as family." Harrowden set the page down with controlled precision. After my brother died, discrepancies surfaced. Not enough to prosecute then. Enough to bury confidence. He looked up, and for the first time she saw grief not polished into etiquette. Raw, old, still ruling him. I decided, he said, voice thinner, that affection clouded judgment, that if I felt nothing, I would misjudge no one again. The room seemed to narrow around the confession. Helena heard herself answer with equal nakedness. Feeling nothing does not prevent betrayal. It only ensures you face it alone. Silence. Fire ticked in the grate. Then Harrowden gave a short, incredulous breath, as if struck by truth he had paid a lifetime to avoid. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "Not what do you demand? Not what must I do to contain this? What do you want?" "Access," Helena said at once. "Openly, not skulking at doors. I need original signatures from your estate contracts during Selden's tenure, and any correspondence with Baines's firm or Clymer Dock holdings in the quarter before and after my father's death. I need your solicitor informed before my stepmother can preempt with lies, and I need it known within this house that I act by your instruction, or I will be isolated before we begin." Harrowden listened without interruption, hands clasped behind his back, like a man hearing military terms. "Done," he said. "On one condition," she braced. "No more carrying this alone. If there is another letter, you bring it to me. If anyone in my household corners you, you tell me, immediately." Emotion rose so fast it hurt. She forced it down into steadiness. "Agreed." He inclined his head, formal, almost courtly, yet the air between them had altered beyond recall. "At 9 tomorrow," he said, moving toward the door, "Mr. Ellery, my solicitor, will meet us in the small library. You will present exactly what you have shown me tonight. I will have Pritchard circulate that you are assisting in educational and archival review by my order." At the threshold he paused. "Miss Muller, Helena." He tested the name like a vow and found it fit. "You were right in the street. Panic obeys authority. I should have remembered." When he left, the corridor remained silent for another minute, then slowly resumed its ordinary life. A distant footfall, a cart on gravel outside, the house breathing again. Helena closed the door and leaned her forehead against the wood. For the first time since her father died, she did not feel cornered. She felt armed. She felt armed. By 8 the next morning she felt watched. Mr. Pritchard's announcement had gone out exactly as Lord Harrowden promised. Miss Muller is assisting his lordship by instruction in educational and archival review. It should have settled matters. Instead, it changed the flavour of the stairs. Where yesterday she had been suspect, today she was dangerous. At 9, Helena entered the small library with her packet held flat against her palm. Lord Harrowden stood by the hearth, coat immaculate, expression unreadable. Beside the table waited Mr. Ellery, spare, silver-haired, with a solicitor's patient eyes and hands that moved nothing until he meant to move everything. "Miss Muller." He inclined his head. "His lordship tells me you prefer precision to reassurance. I approve." "I will take either if true," she said. He almost smiled. "Excellent." For an hour they built order. Ellery read each of Mrs. Muller's letters, marking dates, phrases, implied threats. He compared Helena's copied sheets against Harrowden estate summaries. Lord Harrowden unlocked a dispatch case and laid out older contracts from his late steward's tenure. Robert Selden's signature broad and confident across the bottoms, countersigned by shipping agents Helena recognised from her father's records. Then Ellery requested the Clymer Dock adjustment packet for the quarter surrounding Mr. Muller's death. Harrowden crossed to the iron strongbox, lifted the lid and went still. Inside lay 3 tied bundles and an empty space the size of a handspan where a 4th had been. He looked up. "It was here last week." Ellery was already at his side. "Who has access?" "Myself, Pritchard for inventory checks, Keating for abstracts, under instruction." "Anyone else?" Harrowden's jaw tightened. "No." Ellery closed the lid softly, as if noise might shatter what remained. "Then someone has anticipated us." Helena heard blood in her ears. "If that packet is gone, can we still prove the chain?" "Possibly," Ellery said. "Not cleanly, not yet." A footman entered with the Morning Post. Ellery slit one seal, scanned, and swore under his breath. He passed the page to Harrowden, who handed it to Helena. It was a paragraph clipped from a gossip circular and mounted to card in malicious neatness. An obscure young lady, lately of reduced circumstances, has rendered herself indispensable in a certain noble household by methods more energetic than modest. It is said she has shown uncommon interest in locked repositories and masculine accounts. No name, no need. Lady Ashford chose that moment to sweep in without knocking. Her gaze touched the clipping in Helena's hand, and sharpened with satisfaction she did not bother concealing. "Really, Julian," she said, "the city writes your household as if it were a farce." Harrowden did not raise his voice. "Aunt, leave us!" "I beg your pardon." "Leave us!" She stared at him, then at Helena, then turned in rustling fury and withdrew. The door closed. Ellery exhaled slowly. "That came quickly. Someone has paid for speed." "And if they continue?" Helena asked. Ellery's tone stayed neutral. "If this becomes a public contest of character before we secure documents, opposing counsel will say you forged or exaggerated those letters to protect an improper attachment. It is repellent. It is effective." Harrowden's hand flattened on the table once, hard enough to rattle ink. "What is at risk," Ellery went on, "is not only Miss Muller's reputation. If Baines and Mrs. Muller tie these transfers to your estate and control the narrative first, they may delay restitution for years, perhaps defeat prosecution entirely. Meanwhile, her inheritance vanishes, and your losses become regrettable irregularities no court bothers to unwind. Thomas, Helena thought, the schoolroom endowment she had not yet dared imagine, her father's name, all of it could be discussed into nothing. A knock. Pritchard entered with a sealed note addressed in Mrs. Muller's hand. Helena opened it. "You force me to unpleasant measures. Mr. Baines now holds instrument upon instrument against your late father's house. Unless you return at once and conduct yourself dutifully, liquidation begins. Trunks, desks, papers, all sold to satisfy creditors. You know what may be found in trunks." Her fingers went cold. "They'll strip the house," she said. "He kept sea chests in the back office. If any originals remain—" Ellery was already writing. "I can attempt an injunction against sale pending dispute of debt validity." "Attempt. We move by law. They move by speed and mud." Harrowden looked at Helena. "You are not returning there." "No," she said. "But if we do nothing, they burn what they cannot sell." He held her gaze. "Then we do not do nothing." By afternoon, speed belonged to the other side. A runner sent to place Ellery's emergency filing did not return. At dusk, another clerk arrived, bleeding at the temple, to report the first had been pulled from his gig near Charing Cross, satchel taken, horse cut loose. No witness admitted seeing faces. The satchel had contained copies, not originals, but those copies were of Mrs. Muller's letters and Helena's comparison notes, prepared for notarization. "Targeted," Ellery said flatly when he came back, coat damp with fog and anger. "A thief does not leave watch and coin to take paper." Harrowden asked, "Can we recreate by tonight?" "From memory? No, from originals, yes, if the originals are still secure." They went together to Helena's chamber. The lock was unbroken. The room looked untouched. Bed made, washstand straight, writing stand exactly where she had left it. The walnut box was gone. Helena stood in the centre of the room and felt the world tilt a degree off axis. "I had it this morning." Pritchard, summoned at once, went pale beneath practised dignity. "No one should have entered, my lord." "Yet someone did," Harrowden said. "Seal this floor. No servant leaves the premises." A maid burst into tears within minutes. Another denied seeing anyone. A footman swore he had passed no one on the stair. Pritchard ran the inquiry with military calm, but calm could not conjure a vanished box. Near midnight, when Helena finally sat because her knees threatened mutiny, Thomas appeared in the corridor in his nightshirt, hair rumpled, bandage long gone, but fragility not. "Why is everyone awake?" he whispered. "Nothing for you to worry over," Harrowden said at once. Thomas looked from him to Helena's face and understood enough to be frightened. "Are you leaving?" "No," Helena said too quickly. "Go back to bed, sweetheart." He did not move. "Promise." "I promise I am here tonight." It was not the promise he asked for. He accepted it anyway because he was 9 and exhausted and trying to be brave. After he was gone, Ellery spoke low in the corridor. "Without those letters, extortion becomes allegation. Without prompt filing, sale may proceed. We can still bill from estate records, but the missing climber packet cripples sequence." Helena pressed her cut palm from yesterday's crumpled letter and welcomed the sting. "I kept one copy," she said suddenly. "Not full, phrases. In my account primer, hidden in Thomas's verb charts." Ellery blinked. "Why?" "Habit." Harrowden's eyes met hers with something like fierce approval and grief braided together. "Fetch it." She did. It was not enough. It was something. By 2 a.m, Ellery had gone to draft what he could, and Harrowden had ordered 2 men he trusted to watch the road to Mrs. Muller's house in case trunks were moved before dawn. Helena lay down fully dressed and did not sleep. At 5, smoke woke the house. Not thick, not roaring, worse because it meant time had already been lost before anyone smelled it. A shout from below, feet pounding stairs. Pritchard bellowing orders stripped of polish. "The records room!" Helena ran with everyone else. Flame licked under the records room door at the end of the service corridor, orange and deliberate. Footmen formed a line with buckets. Someone smashed the nearest window. Harrowden appeared bareheaded, coat thrown over shirt sleeves and shouldered toward the door. "Julian, no!" Lady Ashford cried from the stairs. He kicked once, twice. The swollen wood gave. Heat punched into the hall. Shelves inside burned in vertical ribbons, papers curling black and lifting like birds. "Back!" he shouted as a beam cracked overhead. "Keating!" Helena thought, wild and instant. Where was Keating? "Mr. Keating!" Pritchard yelled. "Mr. Keating!" No answer. They fought fire until dawn, smeared grey across the yard. They saved the corridor and lost most of the room. Bundles collapsed into wet ash under boots and cinders. Ink, parchment, wax, gone to sludge. When it was over, Keating's desk drawer was found open and empty. His coat was missing from the clerk's hall peg. In his grate lay a half-burned scrap bearing 3 words in his hand. Monsieur Muller settled. Ellery arrived to smoke and ruin, removed his gloves and said nothing for a long moment. At last, "This is arson and witness flight. We can pursue criminally. Civilly we are maimed." The word landed harder than fire. By noon, Bow Street had sent an officer. Statements were taken. Helena gave hers in clipped detail, hands folded to hide shaking. The officer's expression remained politely doubtful when she mentioned extortion letters now missing. After he left, the physician examined Thomas, who had watched too much from the upper landing despite orders. The boy's headache had returned. His pulse jumped at every corridor sound. "He requires quiet," the physician told Harrowden. "No household alarms. No examinations in earshot." Translation: no visible battle. Helena found herself outside the schoolroom door with Thomas asleep inside and no right answer in either direction. If she stayed, gossip and inquiry swirled around him. If she left, she broke the only promise he trusted. "I have brought danger into your house," she said when Harrowden came up behind her. He answered at once. "No, danger was already in my house. It follows me. It fed here long before you arrived." She turned, grief and fury colliding. "And still we are losing." For the first time since she'd known him, he had no immediate command to offer, only truth. "Yes," he said, "at present we are." Julian did not go to his study. He crossed the west gallery, past portraits he never looked at, past windows fogged by extinguished fire, and unlocked the room at the end that had remained closed most days since his brother died. Andrew's room smelled faintly of cedar and old leather, as if grief had its own preservative. Riding crops still hung by height near the door. A cracked spyglass lay on the table, where no one had moved it in 6 years. Julian stood in the centre and let the practised stillness fall away. He had told Helena affection clouded judgment. It was half true. The rest was uglier. After Andrew's accident, after Selden's careful condolences and careful management, Julian had discovered too late that trust had been siphoned into ledgers and lies while he sat numb in mourning. He had rewritten himself into a man no one could injure because no one could reach him. Efficient, correct, untouchable, and cowardly, sometimes, under the polish. Now, a boy he had promised to protect woke at smoke and shouted names in his sleep. A woman who had walked into blood and mud for that boy stood in his corridor believing she brought ruin merely by standing there. And Julian had watched signs in his own house, small evasions, cool glances, Keating's meek incompetence, and called it order because order was easier than trust. He sat at Andrew's old desk and put both hands over his eyes. "If you were here," he said to the room, voice rough, "you would call me an idiot before breakfast." In memory, Andrew grinned, irreverent and alive. "Only before breakfast? Your standards have slipped, Jules." Julian gave a breath that almost became a laugh and failed halfway. He took out fresh paper. Not estate orders, not legal directives. A note to Thomas for when the boy woke frightened again. "None of this is your fault. Miss Muller remains under my protection and by my choice." A second, longer to Helena, which he did not send because he had never yet written such words to any living soul. "I do not protect you from pity. I stand with you because I believe you. If this ruins me, so be it. I am tired of safety purchased with silence." He folded both pages, kept the second in his pocket, and rose. By the time he re-entered the main corridor, the mask was back in place, less false now because beneath it there was finally decision. He found Ellery in the damaged records room and said, "Assume all internal channels compromised. Bring in outside clerks tonight. We rebuild from surviving estate copies, doc duplicates, insurance registries, and bank ledgers. Quietly, and prepare to go public if required." Ellery studied him. "Public means scandal. Private means they choose the story. And Miss Muller will not be sacrificed to my convenience." Ellery gave one short nod. "Very good." At 4 p.m, the final move arrived in gilt edges. A tray of invitations, 20 at least, delivered by uniformed boy to Harrowden House, and several neighbouring addresses at once so no one could pretend not to have seen. "Mrs. Muller requests the honour of your company at a musicale to celebrate the betrothal of Miss Helena Müller to Mr. Augustus Baines. Helena stared at the card until the script blurred. "No," Thomas said from the sofa, voice thin but fierce. "That is a lie." "It is a declaration," Ellery said grimly, reading over her shoulder. "Social first, legal pressure after." A second envelope, sealed separately for Helena. She broke it. "Since you decline private reason, we proceed publicly. Attend on Thursday and conduct yourself as a dutiful daughter, or I present sworn statements that you stole papers from Harrowden House and set your admirer against honest creditors. Mr. Keating is prepared to attest. I also hold certain original ledger leaves in your late father's hand. Consider what happens to them if I am crossed. Thursday, 2 days." Harrowden took the letter, read, and passed it to Ellery without comment. His face had gone very calm. "Keating is with her, then?" Helena said. "Likely," Ellery answered, "and coached." A knock. Pritchard entered, pale. "My lord, Bow Street has returned." The officer in the hall carried a folded warrant. "By complaint of Mr. Augustus Baines," he said, "to inspect effects of Miss Helena Müller, for documents pertaining to fraudulent inducement and theft of promissory instruments." Thomas made a small, strangled sound. Helena put a hand on his shoulder and felt him tremble. Ellery stepped forward. "You'll conduct no search without my presence and proper inventory." "Then be quick, sir." Harrowden's voice cut through the room. "You will search what the warrant specifies. Nothing beyond. Miss Müller does not stand alone in this house." The officer tipped his hat, unimpressed by nobility, and very impressed by paperwork. "As you say, my lord." While trunks were opened under watch, while drawers were listed and relisted, while Thomas hid his face against Helena's sleeve, the clock in the schoolroom struck 5, then 6, when at last the officers left with nothing but 2 harmless account primers and a scrap of ribbon they claimed might secure papers. Evening had dropped hard against the windows. Ellery closed the door behind them and turned. "They are forcing decision," he said. "If we stay defensive, they bury us under allegation before we assemble proof." Helena looked at the invitation still lying on the table like a gauntlet. "They want me on that dais," she said, "silent and grateful while they name my cage." Harrowden answered, "Then we do not give them silence." She met his eyes. Fear was there, yes, but beneath it the steadier thing now, forged in smoke and loss and refusal. "Thursday," she said. "We go." Outside, rain began again, fine and relentless, tapping at the glass as if counting down. Outside, rain began again, fine and relentless, tapping at the glass as if counting down. By Thursday evening it had cleared, leaving the streets slick and bright beneath gaslight. Carriages lined half the square before Mrs. Müller's house, wheels splashing as footmen called names and ladies stepped down in rustling silk, eager for music and better scandal. Helena sat opposite Lord Harrowden in his carriage, her gloved hands resting on a locked dispatch case across her knees. "You need not do this publicly," he said, for the 3rd time, voice low so only she could hear over the rattle of wheels. "A lorry can press in court." "And give them weeks to sell, burn and lie?" She kept her eyes on the rain-silvered window. "No, she built her power in drawing-rooms. She can lose it there first." Harrowden watched her profile in the reflected lamps. "The officers are in place." "At my request," she said quietly. A pause. Then, with a look that held both concern and unmistakable respect, "At your request." The carriage stopped. A footman opened the door. Sound struck at once. Violin scales from the front salon. Laughter too sharp to be kind. The murmur of guests, already scented blood. Mrs. Müller met them in the entry hall in peacock blue satin, diamonds at her throat as if debt could be polished into legitimacy. Her smile froze for a fractional instant at the sight of Helena descending beside an earl. "My dear child," she trilled loud enough for those nearest to hear, "you came after all. Lord Harrowden, how attentive." "Mrs. Muller," Harrowden said, bowing with glacial courtesy. Helena did not bow. "You wrote that I should attend." Mrs. Muller's fan fluttered. "Naturally. Family occasions are sacred. Come, Mr. Baines is impatient to be congratulated." She turned before Helena answered, forcing them through clustered guests into the main drawing-room. The music hall had been arranged like theatre, pianoforte at one end, chairs in rows, candelabra blazing, a central clear space near the music stand where the announcement would be made. Mr. Augustus Baines stood in that space already, burgundy waistcoat straining at the buttons, jowls flushed with anticipation and wine. Beside him, unbelievably, stood Mr. Keating in borrowed evening clothes and a look of badly concealed fear. There were perhaps 60 people present. Helena recognised half by sight, a quarter by reputation, and the rest by the hunger in their eyes. Mrs. Muller clapped once for attention. "My friends," she sang, "before our first aria, I have the joy, long hoped, at last secured, of announcing the betrothal of my beloved stepdaughter, Miss Helena Muller, to our esteemed friend, Mr. Baines, whose generosity has been the salvation of our house." Polite applause, brittle as thin ice. Baines spread his hands. "Come, girl, don't be coy. Stand up here where folks can see you." Helena did not move. Mrs. Muller's smile sharpened. "Helena!" Helena set the dispatch case on a side table, clicked open both locks, and drew out a packet of foolscap tied with plain black ribbon. "No," she said, her voice carrying farther than she expected. "Before any engagement is announced, we shall settle accounts." A ripple moved through the room. Someone laughed uncertainly. Someone whispered, "Good God!" Mrs. Muller's fan snapped shut. "You will not make a scene. I will make a record." Helena stepped into the open space by the music stand. She did not look at Harrowden. She did not need to. She felt his presence at her back, like a drawn line no one would cross lightly. "In this room," she said, "Mrs. Muller has presented Mr. Baines as a creditor and benefactor. In fact, Mr. Baines and Mrs. Muller conspired to embezzle my dowry, falsify debt instruments against my father's estate, and coerce my consent to marriage to conceal the theft." A collective intake of breath. Baines barked a laugh. "Madness. Female hysteria with arithmetic." Keating took one involuntary step backward. Helena held up the first sheet. "Date, 14 days after my father's death. Transfer of insured disbursement from Muller Shipping Reserve to Baines and Company clearing account, routed through Clymer Dock Holdings, by instruction initialed R.S. amount, £840, 13 shillings. Baines's smile thinned. "You can read numbers. Congratulations. That proves nothing." "Then let us proceed." Helena laid the first sheet on the music stand and lifted a second. "Date, 21 days after my father's death. A debt instrument appears against the Muller house, witnessed by Mr. Baines's clerk and one R. Selden. My father had no such debt in his quarter books. Here," she lifted another page, "is his original quarter summary, copied before it disappeared from our office. Here is a notarized comparison of signatures prepared this morning from surviving dock and bank registries." At the word notarized, several heads turned sharply. Mrs. Muller cut in, voice like a whip. "Copied? Notarized? By whom? You are a dependent girl with a talent for melodrama. Those papers are stolen from Lord Harrowden's house." "Were stolen?" Helena said. "From my chamber 2 nights ago, after your letters demanded I procure ledgers from that same house. Shall I read those letters aloud as well?" Colour rose in Mrs. Muller's face. "Lies!" Helena untied the black ribbon and held up a sealed packet. Originals of your letters are deposited with Magistrate Fenwick, and duplicate copies with Mr. Ellery, solicitor to Lord Harrowden. A third copy was lodged with notary Mr. Pell before I entered this house tonight. If I do not leave this room unmolested, all are to be opened at once." This time the murmur broke into open noise. Baines lunged verbally to recover ground. "What of Keating? Honest clerk from Harrowden's own office. He'll swear you hunted their records and set fire to cover it." All eyes swung to Keating, who looked as if he wished for the floorboards to split. Helena turned to him fully. "Mr. Keating, in your statement to Bow Street, you described my stolen writing box as walnut with brass corner cap, missing at left hinge. How did you know the missing cap?" Keating's mouth opened, closed. She took one step toward him. "Because you handled the box after it was taken from my locked room. And because when you opened it, you found not only letters, but a trap, a copy sheet containing a deliberate error in my hand, one I would never make naturally." She lifted another page. "I wrote Muller as Muller in one line, then corrected it beneath. You reproduced the error exactly in your affidavit draft delivered to Mr. Baines's clerk yesterday at noon." Keating went grey. "I never—" Helena cut him off, crisp as a blade. "Mr. Ellery recovered that draft from the clerk's fire grate before it fully burned. Shall I describe the ash mark on the lower margin?" Keating's knees seemed to soften. He looked at Baines, then at Mrs. Muller, and found no rescue in either face. "You were paid," Helena said, quieter now, and somehow that quiet carried farther. "You were frightened. I understand both. Decide now whether you are merely a thief or an arsonist accessory." "Don't answer her," Baines hissed. Keating flinched like a struck dog. Mrs. Muller made one desperate bid for command. "This is extortion. Lord Harrowden has coached her to ruin us because she ensnared him." The door to the drawing-room opened. 2 Bow Street officers entered in plain dark coats, followed by Magistrate Fenwick's clerk and Mr. Ellery carrying a leather folio. Behind them stood 3 more officers near the hall, blocking easy exit. Gaslight flashed on buttons and warrant ribbons. Ellery's voice was mild and devastating. "By petition filed this afternoon on sworn evidence submitted by Miss Helena Muller, warrants are issued for seizure of financial records and for the detention of Augustus Baines and Emil Keating pending examination for fraud, conspiracy, evidence tampering, and arson." A woman near the back gave a little scream of delighted horror. Baines roared, "You cannot arrest me in my friend's house." Fenwick's clerk unfolded paper. "I can and do, sir." Mrs. Muller turned on Helena with naked hatred. "You ungrateful wretch! I fed you, clothed you." "You sold me," Helena said. Silence fell so suddenly the violinist in the adjoining room stopped mid-phrase. Helena faced the room, every bruise and whispered insult and midnight ledger line behind her spine. "I refuse this engagement," she said clearly. "I refuse all claims made over my person without my consent. I claim legal control of what remains of my inheritance and petition immediate accounting of all debts levied in my father's name since his death." Then, deliberately, she placed her father's signet ring on top of the papers at the music stand. "Let that be witnessed." Defeat did not come cleanly. Baines shoved past one officer with surprising speed for a man his size and snatched at the papers on the stand. Helena moved first, grabbing the top sheet and twisting away as his cuff tore under her grip. "Give me that, you little—" An officer caught his shoulder. Baines drove an elbow backward, clipping the man's jaw. Chairs toppled. Ladies shrieked and surged toward the walls. Keating bolted for the side door. "Stop him!" Ellery barked. He nearly made the corridor before Thomas's old nurse, who had come with Harrowden's party and now stood white-faced near the tea-table, thrust out a footstool in his path. Keating stumbled, crashed against the jamb, and was pinned by 2 officers a breath later, sobbing that he didn't mean the fire to spread. Mrs. Muller saw the room turning and changed tactics instantly. She raised her voice to carry above the chaos. "Gentlemen, I am the injured party. This girl is unstable. Her father doted absurdly, taught her figures better left to men, and she has never forgiven prudent management after his passing. Ask anyone, she imagines conspiracies in household accounts." She swung towards the magistrate's clerk, tears appearing as if summoned by bell. "Mr. Baines only sought to protect legitimate debts. Lord Harrowden has compromised her and now invents charges to avoid scandal. It was viciously clever. Make Helena mad, make Julian predatory, make everything mud." Helena felt the trap and did not step in. "Mrs. Muller," she said, voice level, "on March 3rd you wrote, 'If you are too timid to use your face, use your pity.' On March 11th, I need only imply. On March 18th, 'Retrieve what I asked for before you are sent home in disgrace.' Are those your words?" "They are fabrications." "Then you will have no objection to comparison with your known hand in invitations sent this week." Mrs. Muller's tears faltered. Helena pressed. "You claim prudence. Shall we discuss prudence in paying 3 months' rent in advance on your Brighton agent's cottage under your married sister's name 2 days before this musicale, while telling creditors you were near ruin?" A rustle shot through the guests like wind in dry grass. Baines bellowed, "Irrelevant!" "Relevant to flight," Ellery said crisply. Mrs. Muller rounded on Helena in open fury now, veneer shredded. "I should have married you at 17 and saved myself the trouble." "You tried," Helena said. "No one would take the terms." The laugh that escaped somewhere near the back was quickly smothered, but it landed. Harrowden had remained silent until now, standing just behind Helena's right shoulder, watchful, letting her hold the field. At Mrs. Muller's next lunge, "You think an earl will wed a scandal-sodden nobody?" He stepped forward at last. "Mrs. Muller," he said, every syllable ice, "my intentions are not your concern. Your conduct is." Baines spat toward him. "You sanctimonious bastard! Your own steward robbed you blind, and you never noticed." A flicker in Harrowden's eyes, then stillness. "Yes," he said, "I noticed too late. I do not intend to repeat the error." Baines tried one last gambit. "Keating, tell them the girl asked you for keys." Keating, face streaked with sweat and tears, shook his head in jerks. No, she asked for nothing. Mrs. Muller paid me to watch her. Baines said if I fetched the box, it would only frighten her quiet. I didn't know about the officer, about warrants." "About fire?" Fenwick's clerk prompted. Keating folded in on himself. "Baines told me, burn the records room small, just enough to spoil dates. He said servants would catch it. I didn't mean." Baines charged him with a howl that turned to a grunt when officers hauled him back and clapped irons on his wrists. The sound of metal closing was louder than music. Mrs. Muller went utterly still, not fainting, not weeping now, calculating. Her gaze moved over the officers, the guests, the clerk's papers, Helena's unshaken stance. Helena watched the exact instant she understood there would be no private repair, no whispered arrangement in exchange for silence. "You are ruining your own name," Mrs. Muller said at last, low and venomous. "No," Helena answered. "I am taking it back." Fenwick's clerk approached Mrs. Muller with formal regret. "Madam, you are required to present yourself for examination tomorrow morning. Until then, you are not to leave your residence without surety." "Mrs." Muller drew herself up. I will not be handled like a criminal. Then comply like a lady, Ellery said. One by one, people who had known her for years stepped away from her orbit. The officers led Baines and Keating out through the hall, Baines cursing everyone in reach, Keating stumbling and pleading. No one offered either man a hand. In the wrecked quiet, Mrs. Muller looked at Helena as if seeing not a stepdaughter but an enemy general. "I hope," she said softly, "that victory keeps you warm." Helena picked up the signet ring from the music stand and slid it onto its ribbon beneath her bodice. "It keeps me upright," she said. The house emptied in an hour. Carriages fled with astonishing speed once scandal tipped from delicious to dangerous. Servants moved through rooms collecting abandoned gloves and half-finished champagne, avoiding one another's eyes. The violinist packed in silence. In a small side parlour, Ellery sat at a writing desk, drafting immediate instructions while Harrowden stood by the window like a sentry, and Helena finally sat down. Her legs had begun to shake the instant no one needed her standing. Ellery sanded a page, blew gently, and looked up. "Miss Muller, I require your signature on 3 affidavits while details are fresh. Can you continue?" "Yes." Her voice sounded unlike her own, thin with exhaustion and shock. She took the pen anyway. As she signed, Harrowden set a glass of water by her hand, not touching, not hovering, simply placing it where she could choose it. She drank and went on. Affidavit 1. Extortion letters and coercion. Affidavit 2. Theft of writing box and chain of custody trap sheet. Affidavit 3. Events tonight. When she finished, Ellery gathered pages with brisk satisfaction. Good. Bow Street will examine Keating before Baines's counsel reaches him sober. If we hold him through dawn, we hold him through the first panic. "Will they destroy more?" Helena asked. "They will try," Ellery said, "but not quickly now." From the doorway came a small voice. "Is it done?" Thomas stood there in travelling cloak over his nightshirt, hair untidy, clearly smuggled from Harrowden House, against orders by someone compassionate and reckless, likely his nurse. Harrowden turned sharply. "Thomas, I had to know." The boy's eyes found Helena's face first. "Did they make you marry him?" "No." She held out a hand. He crossed the room at once and climbed into the chair beside hers, pressing against her arm as if to confirm she was real. "Good," he whispered, and then, with the solemnity of children who have seen too much too young, "I hate this part of grown up." Helena rested her cheek briefly against his hair. "So do I." Harrowden watched them, expression altered by something deeper than relief. When Ellery rose to leave with the affidavits, Harrowden walked him to the hall. Their voices murmured low, practical, already shaping tomorrow's legal war. For one fragile minute, the parlour held only Helena, Thomas, and the ticking clock. Thomas looked up. "Will they call you wicked in papers?" "Some will. Will you mind?" She considered the question honestly. "I will mind, but I will not bend." He nodded as if she had assigned him a lesson. "I can help with sums if you need." She laughed then, tired, cracked and real. "I shall remember." When Harrowden returned, he crouched to Thomas's eye level. "You are supposed to be in bed." "I know. Nurse lost an argument with me." "That is not a triumph," Harrowden said, but the rebuke had no teeth. He touched Thomas's shoulder. "You were brave today." Thomas looked between them and, satisfied by something he read there, let his eyes close where he leaned against Helena. Harrowden lowered his voice. "I'll carry him." She nodded. As he lifted the boy, Thomas mumbled sleepily, "Don't send her away." Harrowden's answer was immediate. "I won't." 3 months later, the library at Harrowden House smelled of summer dust and polished wood. The scandal had done its work. So had the law. Baines, faced with Keating's full confession and bank records pried loose under warrant, had paid substantial restitution under court order to avoid a criminal trial that promised prison and permanent social extinction. He took the lesser ruin and vanished to the continent under pretence of health. Keating, shaking and repentant, accepted penal transport rather than contest arson conspiracy. Before sentencing, he testified long enough to dismantle every remaining fiction around Selden's old scheme. Mrs. Muller fought hardest and longest, denials, tears, fainting spells, righteous indignation, whispered appeals through acquaintances who no longer returned calls. In the end, account books did what emotion could not. She was not imprisoned, but she was stripped. Legal guardianship removed, claims over Helena voided, allowance reduced to strict maintenance under supervision of her married sister in Brighton, where no one mistook exile for seaside charm. Helena had sat through every hearing she could attend, spine straight, ink on her gloves, voice steady. Now she stood again in the West Library where once rumour had nearly buried her, sunlight striping the same floorboards. Lord Harrowden stood by the desk, not behind it. No papers between them. "Ellery says the final transfer is complete," he said. "Your inheritance is under your sole control as of noon." Helena exhaled slowly. "I expected relief to feel louder." "It often feels like fatigue first," she smiled faintly. "That too." He took one step closer. "There is something I have postponed saying because I would not burden you while you were still under fire, and because I am a coward in this particular field. Julian, I love you!" The words landed with almost physical force, not because she doubted them, but because he gave them without armour, no irony, no retreat. He kept going, as if once breached, silence could no longer serve him. "I loved you, I think, before I had the decency to name it. In the schoolroom, watching you teach Thomas as if his fear were not an inconvenience but a fact worth honouring. In the small library when you asked for access, not rescue. In every moment you chose truth when easier roads were available." His throat worked once. "I do not want gratitude from you. I do not want dependency. I want a life with you in it, argued honestly and built deliberately." Helena's vision blurred. She blinked hard, unwilling to begin their future by weeping through it. "After my father died," she said, "every promise sounded like a contract someone else could rewrite." "I know. So hear mine clearly." She held his gaze. I love you. I have loved you in fear and anger and admiration, and I would marry you, but not if marriage swallows the work that made me myself." His expression softened with what might have been relief bordering on wonder. "Name it." "My dowry, what has been recovered of it, must endow a permanent schoolroom for girls on your estates. Arithmetic, letters, accounts, not embroidery disguised as instruction. Done. Not done in sentiment and forgotten in budgets. Chartered, funded, inspected yearly. Done," he said again firmer, "in writing, under your oversight. And Thomas is never to be told his tenderness is a weakness." A small huff of laughter escaped him. "He already tells me that himself, usually at breakfast." "Agreed." She stepped closer until only inches remained. "Then yes!" He closed the distance carefully, as if asking one last time without words. She lifted her face and kissed him first. When they parted, he rested his forehead briefly against hers. "There is one more formality," he murmured. He took her left hand, and from his waistcoat pocket drew a ring, old, elegant, not ostentatious, an Ashford heirloom reset with a dark sapphire bordered by seed pearls. "In this room," he said, voice roughened now, "where I once let suspicion stand in for courage, Helena Müller, will you marry me?" She laughed softly through a sudden rush of tears she no longer bothered to hide. Yes, Lord Harrowden. Yes, Julian. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit as if measured long ago. A discreet cough from the doorway made them turn. Thomas stood there, attempting dignity and failing because delight had already broken across his face. "Am I too early?" he asked, "or exactly in time?" "Exactly," Helena said. He whooped, then remembered himself and bowed with absurd solemnity. "Welcome to the family, then. I have several improvements planned for lessons." Julian groaned. "God help us all." Helena took each of their hands, boy and man, and felt for once not trapped between loyalties, but held within them. On a clear autumn morning, the new schoolroom smelled of chalk, fresh pine desks, and wet wool cloaks, drying by the stove. A painted board above the door read, "Muller Ashford School of Accounts and Letters," founded by Helena, Countess of Harrowden. Inside, 12 estate girls sat at long tables, boots muddy, ribbons askew, eyes bright with the wary intensity of children unused to being told they belong in a room built for thought. "Again," Helena said, chalk in hand before the slate board. "If 3 crates of wool are sold at £8 each and carriage costs £3 total, what remains?" A girl in the front row chewed her lip. "£21, my lady?" "Correct. And if someone tells you 12, what do you do?" The girls exchanged looks. One in the back, bold as brass, said, "Ask to see his sums." Laughter rippled. Helena smiled. "Precisely." At the rear, Julian leaned against the doorframe, pretending not to beam. Beside him, Thomas, longer-limbed now, ink on his cuff, whispered, "She frightens them in the best way." "She frightens Parliament-minded men in the best way," Julian said. "These girls are fortunate." After lessons, Helena crossed the yard to the estate office, where a clerk rose too fast and nearly knocked over his stool. "Sit," she told him mildly. "I'm here for the quarterly school account and tenant relief figures, not to bite." He sat, blushing, and handed over ledgers. She wore her father's signet still, now on her finger beside the sapphire. As she turned pages, sunlight struck both rings. Inheritance and choice, not enemies any more. Later that afternoon, a sealed letter arrived from Brighton. Helena opened it at her desk, with Julian nearby sorting parliamentary correspondence. It was from Mrs. Muller's sister, terse and practical. Mrs. Muller continues in tolerable health, receives no callers, and complains chiefly of sea air and economies. She requests additional allowance. Request denied. Helena folded the letter and set it aside. Julian watched her carefully. "Do you wish to answer?" She considered, then shook her head. "No, silence is not surrender when it is chosen." He nodded once, understanding. At dusk they walked to the upper landing of Harrowden House, where nursery rooms had been converted. One to school supplies, one to Helena's private study under the eaves. Not punishment, not exile. A room she had chosen because it held the sky. She paused at the threshold, hand on the frame, remembering another landing in another house, bruised wrist, swallowed tears. Julian beside her waited. Inside, the study was warm. A broad desk stood under the slanted window. Shelves held grammars, legal digests, shipping tables, and Thomas's latest chaotic atlas. On the desk lay a neat stack of copybooks from the girls, a brass lamp, and the walnut writing box repaired with a new corner cap, left intentionally plain so the old scar still showed. Helena crossed to the window. Evening spread violet over the fields. Below, she could hear girls in the yard reciting multiplication tables, while a groom tried and failed not to smile. Julian came up behind her, close enough to share warmth, not close enough to crowd. "Long day, my lady Countess," he said. "Good day, my Lord Earl." He kissed her temple. "Will you come down to dinner?" "In 10 minutes." She looked at the copybooks, then at her own steady hands. I want to finish marking these. As you command. He started for the door, then turned back and knocked lightly on the open frame, amused by the ritual. May I come in later? She smiled, no longer hiding, no longer asking permission to exist. You may always knock, she said, and you may always enter. Outside, the house breathed with ordinary life, and Helena bent over her work as candlelight found her face, not plain, never plain, grave and luminous, and entirely her own.